Good evening, everybody, with another session of Gather to Grow here on Food from Zanzi. And I'm really excited about tonight's session because we're doing things differently. We're focusing on our sister publication, which is Health from Zanzi. And my co-host tonight is none other than Noluthando Ngakani, who's the editor of Health from Zanzi. And tonight we're talking about what is a healthy food relationship. Noluthando, welcome here on Gather to Grow. It's great to have you with me as co-host, and I'm excited about tonight's topic.
Dumelang Mzansi and Dumelang to you, Dawn, and also Dumelang to our panel of experts. I'm so excited to be joining on the first ever Health from Zanzi installation of Gather to Grow. Our big sister publication, Food from Zanzi, are really doing amazing things with the platform. I'd like to start a bit with just a background of what Health from Zanzi is. So we are a Kasi health and wellness publication, and we unpack big topics with local perspectives. And as you said, on our agenda today, we will be unpacking food relationships and what it means to have a healthy relationship with the food on our plates. To kick off this space, I would love us to start off with some introductions. Can we start with the Association for Dietetics on our panel?
I'm Rieta Haramse, the public relations representative for the Association for Dietetics in South Africa, and really excited to talk about this important topic with all the listeners and share our expertise.
Thanks so much, Rieta. It's great to have you with us, and so excited to have you share and gather to grow with us here on Health from Zanzi and Food from Zanzi. Next, we have Roslyn. Roslyn is also a dietitian, so we have dietitians in the house, people. So if you have any health questions, you better get them jotted down as soon as possible. Roslyn, great to have you with us.
My name is Roslyn. I work as a clinical dietitian in a hospital in Gqeberha or Port Elizabeth. I also have a postgraduate diploma in sports nutrition. I love food and cooking, and I'm very excited to be here and discuss today's topic. So thank you for the welcome.
Lovely to have you here, Roslyn. And then next we have Jason van Heerden, who's also a registered dietitian.
Lovely to be here. So guys, I'm Jason. I'm a dietitian. I've been in practice for about 4 or 5 years. I've got a passion for sports nutrition, passion for my work. I'm excited for our topic that we're going to be doing tonight.
Roslyn, what are food relationships and what does a healthy relationship with food look like?
In terms of what a healthy relationship with food means, it means that you can eat foods that you enjoy and that make you feel good mentally and physically. So basically not to label foods as good and bad, just to make eating a very positive experience.
Can we also have some insights from Jason and Rieta?
Let's not think of our relationship with your partner, with your friend, with your colleague, right? A colleague is an interaction, right? It's something that changes, it evolves. Every day there's different stresses, different situations, your routine changes, your environment changes, and it's basically your interaction that you have with that. In that, your food, even though we might have a routine of it, say eating at certain times, is that a relationship of how we feel? Is it going to energize me? Am I going to feel guilty? If I look at this food, is it going to help me? Is it going to set me back? It's about that, how you think about food and how it makes you feel emotionally, physically, mentally as well.
That's actually something that I never thought about, Lulu. Think about how the food makes you feel. Because usually we'll talk about a Sunday plate and your favorite food and you're excited and you eat it. But I've never really thought about everything that I eat in that way. So that's a very interesting take on it, Jason. Rita, what is your take on this specific question in terms of, what is a good relationship? And there's no good and bad, like Roslyn said, but what is the relationship that you have with your food?
I think there were so many valuable points shared already, but what I just like to add is you don't feel the need to justify your food choices. I know that this is often something that happens if you go out with family and you now have to say why suddenly you eat your choppy without the fat on, or why suddenly you choose to opt for the whole wheat pasta or ask for your dressing on the side. And those might seem like very diet culture type of thoughts. However, I think there's often times when people who sometimes really enjoy salad get ridiculed for eating diet foods, where someone else who might actually be eating something a bit more indulgent, you mentioned not focusing on good or bad foods, but maybe eating something that would generally be seen as a bad food, where those people might actually be judged for that choice. So in terms of that, where we meet that all with everyone's on the same level, there's no moral high ground, no label on food, and therefore it will actually help you to not obsess over what you eat. I think that's definitely a sign of a healthy relationship with food that people don't necessarily think about, but you don't feel the need to justify or to eat something just to fit in. So definitely that's something that I'd like to add.
Rieta, when we think about these good foods, we typically think that food needs to be organic. Does food necessarily have to be organic for it to be considered something that's healthy for you?
I think that's one of the very big myths that I'm looking forward to the other dietitians also assisting and breaking this myth and showing people that organic actually also still uses pesticides. There are just certain ones who are maybe not on the specific list of pesticides that people are aware of. It's like some foods that sometimes also contain additives, which are normally really demonized if we think about the term of processing. But even just the washed lettuce that you buy in the grocery shop is actually seen as processed food because it does count as processing. There's something that happened with it. So in terms of organic food versus your everyday fresh produce, if you're going to choose between eating produce and not eating produce, I would actually recommend please have the one that's then non-organic, have the one that's the normal food. If you already have your vegetable garden and you're cooking and eating your own crops, please, I'm not in any way, shape or form recommending that you move backwards. But with that, we're just saying that organic has this health halo. It's actually not that much better than normal produce already. But I would love to hear the other dietitians' comments on that.
Yes, I love the comment about the health halo. I'd love to also hear some inputs from Rosalind, who is actually the cook in the house.
I think Reza brought up some brilliant points. It's all kind of what I've written down as well. So that organic foods are not significantly more nutritious at all than other foods, and non-organic foods are not necessarily unhealthy. I think we should more focus on trying to eat a variety of foods. So that's all your fruits, all your vegetables. Doesn't matter if it's organic or not. I think we should more focus on including in our diets that contribute to our health rather than what we should restrict.
Yeah, Jason, you can go.
Yeah, Rosalind, amazing points. I definitely agree with you. Because, you guys, your point's brilliant. They're coming from, the front of, everything can be justifiable, with regards to organic, inorganic, because we're looking at it from, the health standpoint there. But I want to look at it from someone that's maybe looking at it from the other side. But to say, but Jason, because someone will ask me, but, preservatives and it's not organic and it's bad for my health and when it cause cancer and those type of things. And technically, it all has to do with the dosage. That's the big thing. So do pesticides, can it have an effect on health? Yes, if you have an excessive amount, yes. And there's brilliant articles that we can also share that also goes to show how much of a food you need to have in order to get to the pesticide level in order to start having an effect. And it is an excessive amount. So on the one hand, if we're saying, can it be an issue? Potentially. But to get to that level, I'm much more worried if someone's having, let's say, for example, you need to have 200 apples a day to get to that pesticide level. I'm much worried about your gut processing 200 apples a day than that, let's say, for example, that pesticide that's potentially on there. It's all about the dosage that you're actually having in. So looking at it from that reverse angle is not too much to worry about in most cases.
I think that's really funny. More worried about your gut health from eating 200 apples. But just in terms of people who prefer to organic over non-organic food. So they say they feel better, they feel lighter. Is that really true? Free-range eggs are free-range eggs. I have 3 chickens in my backyard, and I do think that my eggs taste a bit different from the eggs I buy in the store. Is it my imagination?
Those organic eggs, the white ones, always make you feel so elite. Also, there's this elitist attitude of eating organic food as well.
The one thing for me is actually also something that I thought I'd raise, but I think it's a good place to start that discussion now. If you specifically prefer organic foods or you specifically prefer those elite eggs, then the thing that I want to tell you is have that. When you have a good relationship with food, and as I said, you don't have to justify your choices to anyone. It's about having the items that you enjoy and feeling good when having those. There are certain yogurt brands that I choose over others, not for any other reason than the fact that I enjoy the taste. And that's actually one of the marks of having a good relationship with food, being able to choose the items that you enjoy and not having to justify that to anyone. If it's because you feel that there are health concerns, then definitely it's where we say, let's look at the science, let's look at what the evidence says. But if you specifically enjoy it, have it by all means.
Lulu, we also have a question here from one of our listeners who's asking whether or not having a healthy food relationship is expensive. You just spoke about, the eggs that makes you sort of a little bit elitist. Is that something that we need to think about? Maybe Roz answer that question.
So I'm not sure that having a healthy relationship with food is expensive. It is possible to have a healthy relationship with food without spending a whole bunch of money, like going to the shops and saying, okay, I'm going to buy every healthy looking food here and that's my healthy relationship with food. I think we can try to adjust our current habits, so small consistent changes to include healthier items in our diet without having to spend a lot of money. Yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be elite or expensive, especially if, for example, you have a vegetable garden, and that's also going to be easy on the pockets as well.
So healthy wouldn't then mean to go to the Woolworths over the ShopRite or anything like that. I like that sentiment, Roz. Jason or Rieta, do you have anything to add to that?
I think from my side, I've got an interesting take on it, right? Because I work with a few clients that struggle with their relationship with food, and I'm going to give you examples. So let's give someone a name. Let's call someone Bob, right? So Bob comes in, and he actually says, "Jason, since I've gone organic, I've been feeling better. I've been going to gym more. I feel better. My energy is fantastic, amazing." But it's more so because he is in the mindset of, okay, look, I'm eating organic, so it kind of leads to other things falling into place. Because he feels like if I'm eating organic, it means I'm healthy. It means I'm going to go to gym. Kind of association that comes from that, almost like an indirect health effect that comes from it. But on the other hand, Bob could then feel, if I'm not eating organic food, I'm eating out at Chris's house, Chris does not have the organic chickens that he has at home, and it causes him food anxiety. He feels that now I'm cheating, I'm not having the optimal food, so to say, and that can be a very unhealthy relationship as well. So, the thing is that if you end up saying, but I'm only going to buy organic food, which sometimes, not always, can be more expensive, it can unnecessarily lead to money issues because you feel that I can only eat organic. So it always depends on the context and the person. But if you feel that I can only eat organic, and if you can't eat anything else, it gives you kind of that feeling of guilt or anxiety, then I would say that that might be a red flag for an unhealthy relationship with food. So it's all about context sometimes.
I actually like that you touched on the aspect of guilt, Jason. So then how do you actually deal with the guilt of munching on something that is, bad for you? I'm going to put it in inverted commas and say bad for you.
So I'll answer that, but I would love to hear what Beata and Rosalind also has from that. So that's the thing. If you're looking at your relationship with food, it is very easy to kind of have left and right, so to say. This is good and this is bad. There's no gray area, so to say. But, it depends on why the food is bad for you. If you're looking at, let's say, calories, or it's organic or non-kind of organic, is that you kind of put it in a box and you try and justify it. To say, but if I do this, it's good. If this is bad, and if I don't do it, I lose a sense of control. I feel like I'm maybe a failure. There's a sense of guilt. I mean, using maybe extreme terms in some situations, but for some people, they really are in that reality that it can feel so intense. That's why we need to always, as dietitians, and us as listeners, need to really think, but why did I put this food in this box? Is it for me to have the sense of control that I'm doing things good or bad? Or is it the sense of that, I just want to be better, I want to improve myself with general health? So we actually need to, what is the reason why you put the food as good or bad? Because as Rosalind said earlier, many foods can be justified. I mean, I'm going to give an example of, let's say, pasta, right? For my bodybuilders, they need to have 4,500 calories a day, which is a huge amount of calories. It is completely justifiable for them to have 5 bowls of pasta at night because they need to eat that much. So that's the thing, is that where that for someone might be bad, for them it's very good. So it's all about the context and where someone's coming from and why we put food in that box in the first place.
Beata, do you have anything to add on points that Jason just touched on?
Yes, I love the fact that you brought the individualized aspect to it, because if I look at my patients' needs, they are as unique as their fingerprints. If I look at their wants and their desires, and to realize that we have these foods in our mind that we would maybe classify as healthier versus unhealthier, and maybe if we go that drastic, good and bad, well, I think it's very important to remember that the mark of a good diet is not necessarily about what you consume on a one specific day, but it's actually about consistency. If I every single day eat something that's maybe deemed, as you said, in inverted commas, bad, if I every single day eat chocolates, my body will actually communicate with me, listen, Rita, I'm not enjoying this. Maybe my energy levels will tank. Maybe I might have skin breakouts. Maybe over the long term, I might see that I have a higher insulin and a higher sugar level. And over the long term, something like an increased HbA1c. Don't want to go into detail in terms of that, but just want to raise that it's worthwhile for us to remember that there are definitely nutritional differences between something like a chocolate versus something like an apple. But we'll get to this later in the discussion as well. But the moment when you tell yourself, whatever you do, you're not allowed to have this red list type of food, it actually increases the preoccupation with that. It actually enhances that food's desirability factor, which then leads to, at a later stage, possibly binging on that item. So I think a big thing is to realize that if we allow ourselves to have certain foods, my one patient actually called it marginal utility, and very big economic terms. And the way that I actually try to understand and wrap my brain around that was supply demand. If there's less supply of something, there's going to be a massive increased demand for it. Versus if I actually allow myself to have something anytime, I don't have to make it count. I don't have to overindulge. I don't have to be preoccupied with that food because there's inherently no moral difference between the two foods. So I know that I've led into some following questions, but I think that it's important to raise that specifically at this point about good and bad foods. But I would love to hear what Roz has to say too.
Just to build on what Beata was saying, Just quickly to summarize, I think the idea is to be mindful of what you're eating without becoming obsessed with what you're eating. For example, if you follow generally healthy eating practices and decide to have a chocolate on Friday evening, you must enjoy your chocolate and then move on with your life. I think this is a much healthier response than feeling incredibly guilty for having that treat, which could lead to negative emotions such as hopelessness and self-criticism. And then, that can also eventually lead to binging and other unhealthy behaviors that are also consistent with an unhealthy relationship with food.
I also have another question from the floor. Typically, as a South African food culture, do we have a bad relationship with food?
I don't actually think we have a bad relationship with food. I think we have some amazing foods in our culture. South African food is the best food by far. And I think it is slowly changing. I think people are trying to change their eating habits in South Africa while still keeping onto the culture. So I know we eat a lot of meat and red meats in our culture as well. But we're also trying to include more plant-based foods and plant-based ideas. I see Meatless Monday has hit it off everywhere. So I think it has to be a bit of both. So we must meet halfway.
Yeah, I think it's important to define what we mean. And I know a few listeners may have joined after the first question about what is a food relationship, because I don't necessarily think we as South Africans have a very bad relationship with food. I think we might have a few foods that can do with a bit of tweaking in terms of improving the nutritional quality. I'm Afrikaans and we eat rice, vleis and aardappels. So that is rice, meat and potatoes. And that's one of the things to notice, that our nutritional quality and diet adequacy in terms of vitamins and minerals and micronutrients might need a bit of tweaking, but I don't necessarily think the food relationship is as bad necessarily. So what I would say that we can improve on is, first of all, people becoming more mindful and becoming more aware of how they feel about the foods that they eat, firstly. And then secondly, becoming more aware. I feel that we often see a lot of mindless eating, a lot of eating in the car, a lot of eating in front of the television and so forth. Although it's a very delicious food and interesting of cultures, and we're not disputing whether it's delicious food, I think it's a bit of a difficult question to just tackle head on without defining what the differences are between a healthy diet versus a healthy relationship with food.
Rosendeta, I love what you've now said. But now also on that is, does when you want someone to come over, you say, come over for a coffee, come over for a beer, come over for a braai. Maybe you can say come over for a chat, right? Or you're more likely to say, listen, come over for something. And, if your friends are coming over to maybe watch the rugby or there's the soccer or some social event, we don't even talk about it. It's just everyone brings meat and we braai. That's just the social, that's the culture. And it just it gives a sense of acceptance. Why do we do a lot of what we do, right? It's to be socially accepted. It's part of it. You want to be good. You want people to like you, so to say. So if we're talking about the diet culture, right? If you feel that everyone else is having sparkle, if you feel everyone else is doing something very quite specific, is that you genuinely would like to join them in that. If you find that you've got a group at work that is very health conscious and they're eating quite healthy, it's about the culture. So we're going to go to the extent of it. If you feel that, if you're talking about relationship or food, if everyone's having a braai and then you bring fish to the braai, or if you bring something like a salad and it's out, and people judge you, that make you feel guilty for it. The thing is, your relationship with food can be affected because that other people will judge you. But if you've got this kind of environment where you can accept it, that whatever I bring, people will love me for who I am, that has a huge effect on how you feel about food, because you don't want to be kind of an outlier. But we must realize the big point I'm trying to make here, food is highly personal, yes, but it's also extremely social. Let's think Christmas, let's think Easter, New Year's, having a drink at midnight. It's incredibly social, and we must work with that, having a beer together, that everyone must have a piece of celery together. I think it's going to be quite difficult to try and change that culture because we want to enjoy those good times together.
And Rosalind, do you have anything to add there?
Food is such a positive thing. It brings people together.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Christmas and my Christmas memories and cooking in the kitchen with my mom and my aunts, and everyone kind of has this specialty dish and you taste while you're cooking, and it's just a lot of eating all around. But that food and that food culture is definitely ingrained in us as South Africans, but also for everyone in other parts of the world as well. Usually when you start watching what you eat, you kind of have this feeling where you're almost depriving yourself from forbidden foods. How does one stop the cycle? So if I'm deciding, okay, after December, guys, I've had enough now. I ate too much. I'm going to take a break and I'm just going to eat my salads and try to be healthy. How does one kind of make it so that it's part of a bigger journey and not just you saying, okay, now enough is enough. I need to go clean or completely good and avoid all of these, what people might refer to as bad foods.
If I can jump in there, I think something very important to take into account, especially in a scenario like that, is point number one, You might have heard of something called the dieter's dilemma. It starts with exactly as you're saying, after December, I have a need. I want to change my body. I want to gain muscle. I want to lose fat. I want to trim down or whatever it is. And that's often met with restriction. As you're saying, cut out, just eat salads, just eat that. However, if that is something that is actually something that I love, in my case, if I have to cut out coffee, the chances of me being able to stick to that long term is way less than if I actually do something that is sustainable. If a diet tells me don't eat raisins, it's going to be very easy for me because I don't like raisins in the first place. So in terms of that, why that cycle is met after the restriction is often met by someone falling off the wagon or failing at their diet or whatever you want to call it. And that's then met with a lot of feelings of failure, a lot of feelings of guilt, which then after a while people start internalizing. They tell themselves, I don't have willpower, I don't have self-discipline. And they just go back, restrict even more. And ultimately this entire cycle continues in oblivion. And that's why a lot of people feel despondent. That's why a lot of people are of meaning that diets don't work. And I agree, if it's something that's just a diet is not something you just go on. It's something that's a long-term life assessment. So my advice would be to actually do things that seem doable, like a 1% increment difference. I've read a book that I love that's called Atomic Habits that just says, like, what is the one small change that you can do that you can stick with for an entire year? So whether that is, you know what, I'm going to incorporate more salads rather than eating just salads. I'm going to, instead of taking the elevator or the lift, I'm going to take the stairs. I'm going to drink more water. I'm going to insert XYZ here. Small habits that seem small and minuscule, but that over a long period add up and that can yield lasting differences. And that is why dietitians use the dreaded phrase, it should be a lifestyle. But it is because it should. It should be something that you can implement over a long period of time that then after that becomes your new normal. So that would be my piece of advice on forbidden foods, on restriction, and on how to make a lifestyle change.
I don't think I'll ever grow tired of hearing that about long-term and that it's a lifestyle. Sentiments that you just shared, Rieta, because that's what it is at the end of the day. Then Jason, would you like to add on to what Rieta just said as well?
I love Atomic Habits, and that really does work. You know, we find that, for example, if someone says they want to do something, like I've never gymmed, but now I'm going to gym a few days, a few weeks maybe, but it normally kind of falls off because what can happen is you miss one day and it's feeling, shucks, I feel like I haven't done it properly, and it can very easily snowball down, and you can just say, listen, you know what, it didn't work out. It's not the way to go. But if you said, for example, what Rieta said, I'm going to walk for 5 minutes, and the next day I'm going to work for 5 minutes more, and you build up slowly on that, you're actually much more likely to succeed in it. And the research does back that. But something else I want to chat about is often when we look at a diet, and just like our food relationships we spoke about earlier, always put foods in a good box and a bad box. And as soon as we spend more time or any time in the bad box, so to say, then we fail. We're off the diet. Shucks, I can't do it. It's not for me. And it's very easy to fall off the bandwagon, so to say. That's an interesting psychology I love to do with my clients. I'm very open with them about it, is to say, look, if someone has something feel like I have to have X food, is that on the one hand, because some of my clients really do want someone to say, Jason, tell me I shouldn't have it. They're super dedicated and they actually work very well on it. And they actually have a good relationship with food, just need that accountability. So I just wanted to add that in for some people, is that they actually thrive on that, of getting, kind of very strict kind of borders, because it gives them that sense of control. So just something to touch on. But on the other hand, is that we can then try and remove those foods from your environment. So let's say you love your chocolate, a cookie, is that if it's not in your environment, you're less likely to have it. So instead of saying, I will never have cookies, why not say, I'm just not going to buy cookies? So if it is there, let's say if you're at a friend's house or if it's a birthday function and there is a cookie and you have it, it's okay. Because you've not failed your task. You've not failed, I can never have a cookie. It's just that I'm not going to buy the cookie. So then it's that sense of there, I can have it. So that's just a healthier mindset that might work for some. But a third thing, and I find this works so well, if you've got someone that says, Jason, I love my chocolate, and if you tell them, look, for the next 6 months, you can't have chocolate, it's very unlikely they're not going to do it. But in my meal plans that I normally work out with these type of clients is that I give, let's say for the snacks in the day, I'd give a few snacks. Let's say, for example, yogurt, and we could look at fruit, and we could look at some nuts, and even a biltong, those things. But I would then put it as a treat. If they love knickknacks, for example, I will then put in the small knickknacks and as a treat, because not only is it there, but it's an option. It's allowed. If I want to have it, it's okay. It's not this forbidden fruit that I can't have. And if I have it, it's like, okay, but Jason's given it to me. I can have it. And even if you say, well, Jason's given it to me as an option, I can have times a week if I want to. Normally that desire of, but I want to have it every day kind of goes away because it's like, okay, but I can have it, but it's not this restriction. It's not this forbidden fruit that I want to have. It is that as soon as you can't something, supply and demand, you can't have something, you genuinely want more of it. Meanwhile, if you as dietitians can work with a healthier relationship with food, of offering something, something that you can still get that sense of I've had it, you're not feeling deprived. And for many people, that can be a good relationship with food. But I'd actually love to hear Rosalind's kind of take on that way of dealing with someone with a healthy relationship with food.
I really like how you say, okay, I'm not going to buy all the cookies. I'm just, if there's a cookie there and I really feel like a cookie, I'm going to have the cookie. I think it's a really good example of having food freedom. So not being so hard on yourself, not being so strict with yourself. Because I feel like diet culture these days, it describes a healthy diet as something that has to be incredibly restrictive and strict in terms of foods that are allowed and foods that are definitely not allowed. I think that's actually what causes all the negative thoughts, like, oh, now my dietitian says I'm never having chocolate for a whole year. And then, you're going to want a chocolate every day of your life if that's what your dietitian tells you. But, for example, if you're planning a meal plan for someone who always has cake and coffee with her mom on a Friday morning, and now you're putting her on a diet, you're not going to deprive her of that cake and coffee with her mom. It's part of her life. It's part of her, what she does, and it's not something she's going to change. Then just say, cool, you can have the cake. I can incorporate that into your meal plan. It's fine. Yeah, I think it's just a really good example of food freedom and how we should be eating.
So just on that point, maybe I could ask, how often this changes over time? Because I remember, when I hit my late 20s, my dad said to me, no, you need to watch what you eat now because your metabolism is changing. So it was very difficult for me. I have a very good relationship with my food. So when I see something that looks really good, I really want to eat it and I enjoy it. And, I savor the moment almost. And when you get older, how differently should you start thinking about the relationship that you have with your food? Like with kids growing up, you encourage them to eat new things. And I think I listened to something like you have to give them something 40 times before they can decide whether they like it or not. What should our thinking be around that? If I can maybe shift the conversation to that a bit. Rita, would you maybe like to take this one?
So if I understand you correctly, you want to say how should our relationships with food change over time? Is that correct?
Just in terms of the way you think about it. Because if I'm preparing food for my son, I kind of cook the same meals and things that he likes maybe, or I explore his palate and think about other options in other food. But how does that change over time, the way we eat, the way we build a relationship, and the journey that we were talking about earlier?
Interesting question, and something that I have to say I haven't really given a lot of thought on, so I'm actually thinking on my feet here. One thing that I can, however, say that immediately comes to mind is I think it's roughly the same. For me, if I think about my parents encouraging me to try new flavors, try new foods, I would actually classify myself as a very adventurous eater. So my husband even more so than myself, but when we go to a restaurant, if there's a try me, I'm new type of thing, then we will go for it. Be adventurous and explore new type of foods. When we think about eating habits shifting rather than our relationship with food shifting, I would say eating habits would shift in the way that as you get older and your metabolism gets slower, it's dependent on you actually looking at what it is that you eat, making sure that it's nutritious. I'm thinking even especially in older adults to make sure that it's protein rich to prevent muscle loss because maybe not as active as they were before. So I would say that would be in terms of nutritional differences between when you're younger versus when you're older. But regarding your relationship with food, how you think about food, I don't think that would change. My opinion would be that I don't think that that's necessary actually for that to change. We always want to have a good relationship with food. It might evolve and definitely become more mature, but as you would compare your relationship with anyone else, and I think back to Jason's example of a relationship with a work colleague. But from my opinion, I would actually encourage it to stay curious, to stay adventurous, to eat foods, to enjoy it, to still not have food guilt, never mind the age. But I would like to hear the others' opinions as well.
It's all about context and as well about what is the motivation. Right? For example, I'm going to give a few examples. I might have, let's say, a 60-year-old gentleman that is now coming to me because his relationship with food, he wants to change it purely because he now has grandchildren and now he wants to be healthy because he wants to be able to hold his little sons, should I say, and he wants to be strong, right? So the relationship with food, the kind of motivation behind it can change. Meanwhile, if someone's, let's say, an intense sportsman or sportswoman, is that their motivation is glory and performance and achievement and that. Sometimes, as kids, how often have we seen it? That, for the kids, just give them the cookie, give them the extra food. Here's another bit of meat because you're growing. You need to eat more. It's about the kind of context in the situation. Meanwhile, if you've got, let's say, a child which has, let's say, for example, quite a specific disease, or let's say that needs specific management, the relationship changes. And I find that often with my clients, I always try and find the why. Are you doing this because your partner said something about your physique? Are you doing this because you want to be healthy for your children? Are you doing this because you're scared of getting cancer because maybe your friend got cancer and they had a horrible experience from it? I think it really is about the why. It's about what your motivation behind food, your relationship with food is often the why that you look at and manage that accordingly.
Thanks so much, Jason. Lulu, I think we have a speaker, one of our listeners wanting to ask a question. So Tuli, would you like to unmute your mic and ask the speakers your question?
Hi, everyone. Maybe not more a question, but also to just contribute on what maybe inform the way we eat over time. And from the perspective I come in, it's also to just look at food system of the particular time that we are in. From a retail perspective, you would often look at the trends. When you look at, there are micro and macro trends. So one of them being like the dissemination of information. With food, you will see that as more and more information became available, when people start asking questions, because by the time you buy something, you already know everything there is to know about it. But when now customers asking, what are all these e-numbers in food? It now pops a discussion to say, do we still need e-numbers in food, or the current times require us that we work with something like clean label? The happenings of the time tend to also have a great influence in terms of the foods we eat, because now we are even exposed to international flavors. If you look really closely, SA market 15 years ago, we didn't have something like a chorizo. Get exposed to information. We know what the Spanish eats and what the Portuguese eats. We also, over the years, almost gradually moved towards our own form of a chorizo. And it's the same with almost everything that affects consumers and in turn affects the food system. What is available at the time tends to affect the way we eat and what is available to us. I think that was my one comment in terms of how does our food change over time.
Thanks so much, Shituli. I think it's so amazing, Lulu, that we have farmers in the house who can also give a different perspective on the topic. For those who's usually on this Gather to Grow on Food from Mzansi, you know that we usually talk about exclusive farming topics. But tonight we're doing things differently with our sister publication, Health from Mzansi, and Lulu's leading the way for us here tonight.
I also wanted to ask the dietitians, and also just to touch on the points that Situli just made about how, our food has become, kind of intercontinental. And a big influence, I feel, is this plant-based movement. But I wanted to bring it back to, to our, I wanted our dietitians to offer a bit of local perspective on this. There's been a lot of chatter around, especially African communities, who say that they have long, sort of practiced these plant-based diets, especially things like veganism. I want to know from our panel of experts, where does this word stem from? Because, if you ask somebody from the villages if they know what veganism is, we've been eating very plant-rich foods for all our lives and we never had a label for this term. So I just wanted to ask if our panel of experts would be able to unpack, this veganism movement and this plant-based movement.
The plant-based is that it can be quite healthy. Look, the thing is, everything has its pros and cons. Plant-based, it's very high in fiber, generally high in antioxidants. But plant-based doesn't necessarily mean healthy, right? The thing is, it's very easy to kind of overdo plant-based or kind of just focus on certain sections of plant-based. It has its pros and cons, and that's why we need to look at each person individually. I love what Letta said about each person is its own fingerprints, right? Is that their own needs, own unique situation, own kind of routine. In general, my kind of take on it is that for some people, it's just what's available, it's what's affordable, it's what food that they like. And I say go for it as well. But it's also interesting to hear from my vegan clients what veganism means to them. Is it for an ethical reason? We don't want to be killing animals. Is it because of a health reason? Is it because some people feel that they've gone vegan because, they lose weight on it either? Some people find that their blood sugar is managed a little bit better, or maybe a medical condition. Some people feel that they manage it better. So just from a vegan standpoint, it kind of depends on the context. I don't really know if I fully understand the question, but just unpacking it is going to be, again, what is the reason why you're doing it? And if that's the way that you eat and you're healthy and you're getting all your nutrients that you need, I'd say go for it. But I've also seen it in some cases, people eat, in some cases, as a restrictive diet because they love meat, and then they kind of do it in a way to put themselves in a box as well, which is not always sustainable long. So it's interesting in the context of why someone is doing a vegan or more plant-based type of diet.
I think you raise a very important point, and I'm glad you say that, Jason, because I do see a lot of eating disorders, and often the fear-based approach, especially if there's maybe a lot of vegan propaganda that's put out there where unfortunately the health choices get almost feel being forced down upon you. And I'm definitely not saying that all vegans are like that. I know a few amazing vegans, but it's just important to ask your why it is that you're doing it. Important as well to raise in this part of the conversation, and Jason alluded to this, but plant-based does not necessarily mean plant only. A plant-based diet means that the majority of your diet comes from plants, and that is exactly what you're talking about. People in villages and communities who say, we've always been eating this, and it's not these fancy foods that you buy and poke bowls and that you would see all the photos on Instagram with. But a plant-based diet just means that the majority of the diet consists of fruits, veggies, nuts and seeds, your whole grains, your legumes. When we think about those foods, as you said, fiber-rich, very good for controlling your blood glucose levels, controlling cholesterol levels, informing in terms of gut health, really a beneficial diet to follow. But it is important to look at the adequacy. Am I getting enough iron? Am I getting enough calcium, vitamin B12, and so forth? So those are the important things that I would say think about. And please remember that it's important to individualize. Again, just reiterating the individualization aspect of it, where I might actually need, let's say, a bit of meat to actually get my iron needs. We know that combining non-heme iron, so iron that comes from plant sources, to animal sources of iron actually enhances the absorption of that. So in that way, to ensure that your diet is adequate and healthy in the long term as well, but definitely just to re-emphasize the point that vegan diets can be extremely healthy, but it can also be a way of restricting and a way that can really harm your relationship with food if it's not properly considered and actually looking at it is that you've started with that diet.
Since we are in the changing of seasons, it's almost winter time, how can you sort of beat cravings for unhealthy foods this winter? Do you avoid sweet treats like the plague? I'd like to throw this question to you, Rosalind.
I think we've spoken about this a little bit before. I think my main advice would just to be flexible. So understand that the occasional treat's not going to kill you. Winter, we want to start eating warm foods. We want to start eating comfortable foods. And often they do to have a bit more calories. We start having the very thick soups and stews. And we find our appetite sometimes increases. So I think my main tip would be try to find healthier alternatives for the snacks. So if you're craving something sweet, rather have something like a fruit rather than like a bag of chips. Make some air fried popcorn, and then it's still warm and comforting, but with obviously a little less calories.
I often find, right, we're looking at success, but we're not just looking at short-term, medium-term, and long-term success. We're not as in just one individual aspect, looking at all three. I often say we have to work with the craving and not against it. So someone says, Jason, but I want to have something sweet at night. I tell you, but John, just be strong. You've got to be better. You know it's not good for you. That's normally not the right way to go about it. You've got to say, okay, look, you want something sweet, right? But you like tea. What about instead of sugar, why don't we use a sweetener? Oh, you know what you like? Coke. Why don't we just do Coke Zero? For example, there's some sugar-free jellies that we can look at. Instead of saying, no, don't have anything sweet, why not find an alternative that they can go to, that better relationship with foods? Instead of them giving in and having the chocolate and be like, but Jason said I shouldn't have it, so I know I should be better. Rather say, but it makes sense. I can just pour myself a glass of Coke Zero and it's okay. It's not really adding calories. It's, it falls in my diet. There's no guilt. I feel good. Why not work with a craving and not against it?
I would also like to add to actually think about not necessarily just satisfying the craving, but to ask yourself, why is it that I'm having this? Am I having this because I am emotional? Because there's a quote, I think I use it every single day, but if the craving or the urge to eat comes from anything else but physical hunger, eating will never satisfy it. So whether it is the indulgent treat, whether it's the healthier option, whether it's the unhealthy option, the emotion will still be there and it will actually grow because I'm suppressing it. One day I bump my knee against the couch and then suddenly all hell gets loose because I bomb out because of all the emotions that I've bottled up. So think about why it is that you're eating as well. We don't just want to feed into the habits. We don't just want to feed into the boredom or into the emotion. We actually want to be mindful of what is below eating rather than just addressing the eating. Eating is rarely the problem, it's often the symptom, and we have to find what is the real root of that and address that.
It's a powerful closing note on that question, Iriata. Since we've all made these resolutions in the beginning of January, it's March now, and I assume that people have sort of kind of fallen off the bandwagon, speaking for myself here. Do you guys have any practical tips for how our listeners can maybe, keep consistent in their wellness journey throughout the year?
The number one thing is to have achievable goals. We were talking about it earlier. Okay, it's been December. I've eaten a lot. I'm not feeling so happy with myself. I want to start changing things, exercising, eating well. I'm going to suddenly go on a very drastic, restrictive diet, and I'm going to exercise 7 days a week. And then we often find that lasts, maybe a day or two, and then it's not what our body needs. We're not feeling great, so we give up. And then we just go all the way back to where we were without really achieving much. It's obviously a broken record. I think dietitians say it all the time. Small, consistent changes in eating habits over time is more sustainable than dramatically changing your diet all at once. And I think that's probably the most important thing if you're trying to keep consistent with your wellness goals.
And then Jason and Riet.
I just want to echo what Raza said. If you think about perfection rather progress, it would always be progress because that is something that you can stick with. So please don't try and make these massive changes that will last for a day. If it's something that will stay consistent and become your new normal and new lifestyle, chances of you sticking to that is going to be much better.
Bits of advice that I would give. And the one is, I love looking at the research. And one of the things that leads to more long-term effective results, as in sticking with the diet, with exercise, with doing a habit such as meditation or Bible reading or whatever you want to kind of look at. The first one is accountability. So if you, for example, are going to go play tennis with someone, you're going to go play, it's Friday night and, everyone's going to go do CrossFit or something, whatever you'd like to do, or if you've got a walking group, it's that accountability that really, really helps the long term. That it's not just yourself, because guys, motivation, we normally base off our New Year's resolutions or let's say birthday resolution or something off motivation. But motivation goes. We're not always going to feel like we want to, let's say, stick to a certain type of meal plan or stick with regard to a type of exercise. But accountability is massive. It's on one of the top 3 list things that I would advise is you get that accountability in there. So if it's going to be something that you do with someone, let's say you and your partner, instead of doing 2 completely different diets, but there's a diet or lifestyle that you both can stick with together, and you're going to be cooking together, eating similar meals together, it's just going to work so much more practically for both of you. But the second thing I want to talk about in the psychology is actually something called an action step. So it's basically something that you look at every single day that you do. So for example, let's say going to the toilet in the morning, because most people when they wake up, they'll go to the toilet. I'm going to give an example of exercise. So if someone puts their gym clothes on the toilet seat and they're like, okay, but listen, I anyway need to go to the toilet, I am then going to get into my gym clothes. By the time when I stand up, I'm going to get changed and you're in your gym clothes and you can go. If you feel motivated or not, you know that you've got to do that step. So it's another thing such as, for example, as when I have supper, that action step, I know when I dish up, I'm first going to dish up food for tomorrow for lunch, and then I'm going to dish up what I want to have for supper. Because in that way, because if let's say, for example, you struggle with lunch, it's the biggest problem of the day, you forget lunch, you end up ordering takeaways, you end up getting other snacks, those type of things, is that you actually then look at that action step of something you're going to do every day to, let's say, dishing up that extra bit of supper or lunch the next day, or when you go out to the shops, you always try and get, let's say, good snacks, and it's automatically there. It's just going to make it more practical to actually apply. So in summary, accountability and looking at an action step. When motivation dwindles, that's actually going to help you stick more consistently to it.
Lulu, I must say we're getting some sound advice here from our experts, and I'm really enjoying the discussion. Probably should have seen in the beginning, but Tandeka Mahlanga is also on the space. She was one of our expert voices who was going to join us here on this Gather to Grow, but her voice is completely gone due to flu. So she is here. So shout out to you. And thanks so much for listening in as well. Although you couldn't participate in tonight's discussion, we hope to have you on the next Gather to Grow for Health from Mzansi. Lulu, one last question from your side or comment about tonight's session?
I can't imagine going to bed without my hot cup of chocolate and, gooey marshmallows. But do you guys have any suggestions for maybe meals or any alternatives that you can try for the winter-autumn season?
There are actually some really nice skinny hot chocolate replacements, so you don't have to deprive yourself of that. If that's something you really enjoy a hot chocolate. I know most grocery stores sell the skinny chocolate, and Woolies also has one. Winter's like a nice time to have all those warm drinks, so you can switch it up, buy different flavored teas, all of those sort of things. And then in terms of meals to try, I'm trying to eat more plants. That's my goal for this year. I would suggest trying out like a veggie curry with some whole grain rice. That's going to be my meal to try this winter.
I think that's such a good point, Roz. I, in winters, love to make more soups because you can very easily add lentils and other legumes to them, and a lot of nutritious veggies. So that is always a great thing. You can very easily stock up on very nutritious lunches, because it's my best actually to cook in advance and to have that with, let's say, a nice seeded roll. So a very good and healthy meal. I know those skinny hot chocolates that you're referring to, they're also definitely part of my winter staples. But to remember that in moderation, normal hot chocolate every now and again won't hurt. If you enjoy tea, to go with that as well. But remember as well, as I mentioned, to ask yourself why it is that you're doing it, not just to run away with a habit or maybe soothe emotions. So in that sense, that would be my 2 cents. Having your soups, asking yourself why it is that you have certain items, and then sometimes just having the indulgent item, because remember, moderation.
From my side is that, we often look at the sweetness side of things, but as well, there might be some people here, including myself, that rather prefer something crunchy at night. So someone might feel like, but look, I want to have some crunchy chips maybe. That is kind of my winter comfort. But instead of, again, we don't want to be working against the craving. We want to be working with it. Meaning something, we try and find an alternative. So let's say for something sweet, in a way, it can be easier. You can get, for example, let's say some tea with a sweetener. You can get some Coke Zero. There's some sugar-free jelly, some Choco Bites. But something like crunchy, rather swapping out your chips for popcorn. If you want to get something crunchy, cutting up some apple slices and then kind of chewing that. If you want something a little bit more creamier, having like a little bit of peanut butter as well. If you're going after the marshmallows, are you after the sweetness, or are you actually after that kind of creamy taste in your mouth? But if you feel like getting 1 teaspoon of peanut butter can do the same, it's your quality of life type of food, I would say go for it. Work with what the craving is and rather work it into your kind of meal plan or way of eating. It's more sustainable and guilt-free. I mean, what a horrible way to go to bed, just feeling, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have had that chocolate. Rather end it off feeling lacquer, feeling good, guys.
Lulu, from my side, I'll have to find an alternative for Vet Cook and mints during the winter.
Even magunya with jam also.
We'll have to find solutions for that.
This was such a lovely space though, Dawn.
From my side, Lulu, I think it was a great first start for our Gather to Grow on Health for Mzansi. So if you'd like to know more about, what Lulu does and her team presents, it's all about Kasi Health, staying healthy and part of our health journey. I think this is the first of many other sessions that we'll have here on Twitter Spaces. We're splitting it between Food for Mzansi, Health for Mzansi, and our other publication, Food for Africa. From my side, Lulu, you were absolutely amazing, and I'm so happy to have you here with me.
I'd also like to express my gratitude for our experts who joined us this evening. You guys always, contribute such lovely insights on Health for Mzansi. Thank you.
Thanks, Lulu. So from my side and to everyone, and from everyone from the Food for Mzansi, Health for Mzansi, and Food for Africa team, have a great rest of the day and see you next week on this space again. Bye for now.